Hello everyone, today we are talking about how to solve practical problems. So a lot of times when we see a word problem on a test or a quiz or even a homework problem, right, we get super overwhelmed because we go, oh, it's a word problem, it's going to be tricky. Well, hopefully today you've learned some strategies of how to break that down so they don't feel so overwhelming, and hopefully you start feeling more confident in those practical problems. So here are the steps that we are going to go through every single time. Number one, we are going to read the whole question all the way through once. We're going to read the whole thing, got all the information, reading it through first. The second thing, we're going to go back and then we're going to look for some key words and numbers. So we're going to talk about some examples of those keywords here in a second, but we really want to think about what the key things are, what are we supposed to be doing, and how should we be doing it. Number three, then we're going to take those keywords and we are going to turn them into a plan. Are we adding? Are we subtracting? Are we multiplying, dividing? What is going on? Number four, we're going to solve it just following our plan. And then number five is one of the most important steps. It is to reread the question and say, does it make sense? If we are adding apples and oranges and all of a sudden we get $100 million, right? Something is not going right in our problem. So we want to make sure that our answer that we came up with makes sense in the problem. So before we get going and see some examples, we are going to talk about what are those key words that we are looking for. So pause the video here. I want you to think about as many words as you can that would tell you to add in a problem. Okay, let's see how many you got. So our big math word for adding is sum, right? If we're finding the sum of two things, we're adding them together. Another thing, a total. Think about your grocery store receipt, right? At the bottom, you add up all the costs together and get your total. Together, we're putting this and this and this all together. We're adding them together. Ascend is one that you see frequently, so that means you're going up. And so if you're going up, you are adding. Increasing, same thing, right? If you're increasing your money, your amount of something, right? That is going to be adding. Above, the same thing, right? So if I have this much above you or above this, then that's more. Again, next one. But all these words are telling us to add. A big money one that we see a lot is deposit. So my paycheck gets deposited into my bank account, so that means it's being added. Now pause the video here and do the same thing with subtraction. Okay, so for subtraction, we've got our big math word is different. So if you're finding the difference between two things, you're subtracting. We know if you're taking away something, we're subtracting. Descending is going down, so that would be subtracting. Again, with decrease, if you have less than something, below something. Below can often also mean negative, so that's something to look out for. And then our money word, instead of me depositing a bank account, money in a bank account to add it, I'm withdrawing money out if I am subtracting it. Okay, pause again and try multiplication. All right, so for multiplication, our fancy math word is product. So the product of two things means to multiply them together. We know we've seen the word times before, right? Of a lot of times has to do with a fraction of something. So if we take half of something or 2/3 of, 5/6 of, right? We're really taking that fraction and multiplying it by that. All right, each, every, per. These are some that you want to be careful with because they can also mean division, which we'll talk about. So anytime that we have groups can kind of be lumped in with that each, every, per. We know that we have groups of things. We're talking about $20 for each t-shirt. Every class has 30 kids in it, right? It's this many kids per bus. So all of these things are talking about groups, but we have to be careful of the wording of whether we're talking about multiplying or dividing. Then the last few are some more specific ones. So if we have twice or double, we know we're multiplying by 2. Triple, we're multiplying by 3. So all of those are still meaning multiplication. All right, pause one last time and try out division. Okay, so then for our division, we have our fancy math word is quotient. The quotient of two things is that dividing between the two of them. If we are splitting something or breaking something up into equal size pieces or groups, we know that we are dividing. Again, with that each, every, per, we'll talk about that again in 1 second. Anything with those groups. We do have some specific words when it comes to dividing as well, like half means to divide by 2. If you take 1/3 of something, you're dividing by 3. So just some things to look out for. So with these ones, if we're talking about multiplying and dividing, and I want to figure out what is the difference, I always talk to my students about if you have a big total, right, and you know how many groups there are, how many things that you're doing, so you're looking for those individual, like how many is in each group or how many groups there are, but you know the big total, that is dividing. So if we have a big total, we are splitting it up. If you know how many are in each little group or you know how many groups there are and you are looking for the big total, like how many total things are there, that's when you're multiplying. So when you've got the big total, you're dividing. When you're looking for the big total, you're multiplying. So hopefully that helps a little bit. The last thing I'm going to say before we get into some word problems are or I guess is, that drawing a picture can help. I am a huge visual person when it comes to thinking about problems, learning about different things. So I love to draw a picture. Again, there's a lot of different strategies when it comes to word problems that might not be for you, but I'm going to show you how some pictures kind of help me and my brain think about some things as we go through these. All right, let's dive in and look at some problems together. Our first one, this temperature problem, we see all the time. We have the highest recorded temperature in Virginia was 110 degrees Fahrenheit in Balcony Falls. The lowest recorded temperature in Virginia was negative 30 degrees at Mountain Lake. So what is the difference in temperatures? So I am looking for those key words, and this time I see that word difference. So remember, if you look at the things we just talked about, difference tells us that we are going to be subtracting. And my two numbers that I have for this situation, I have negative 30 and 110. So I'm going to take that 110 and I'm going to subtract a negative 30. Here's the biggest mistake that people make with this kind of problem is they don't put the minus the negative, right? So we really are subtracting a negative temperature, and so that's going to change our answer. If we do 110 minus 30, that's going to give us a different answer than minus negative 30. So when we subtract a negative, we're actually really like adding. So 110 plus 30, the difference between these is 140 degrees, which we could type that right in our calculator. I also want to show you, though, a picture. So if you think about a thermometer, let's say we've got 0 here, we've got our 110 is up here, and our negative 30 is down below 0, right? I'm trying to figure out what is the difference, or almost what's the distance between those two numbers, right? It's kind of like a number line that we spun up and down. So when I look at this, from 110 to 0 is 110, and from 0 to that negative 30 is 30. So what I'm actually doing is putting those two together, and that's where that 140 comes from. So again, that's where that visual can kind of help us understand something that might not make sense when we just type it in the calculator. On to our next example. You are making chocolate chip cookies, and the recipe calls for 1/4 of a cup of sugar for each batch. How many batches can you make with 1.5 cups of sugar? So again, we're looking for those keywords, and I see the word each. Now remember, each could be dividing or it could be multiplying based on the situation. So we want to know, do we have the big total or are we looking for the big total? I know that I have 1.5 cups of sugar, right? That is the total amount of sugar that I have. And I am breaking it down into 1/4 of a cup for each of these batches. So that big total being broken up, this is going to be a dividing problem. And my two numbers that I'm dividing are that big total I started with, 1.5, and I'm dividing that by 1/4. So let's go ahead and write that one out. 1.5 divided by 1/4 is going to give us 6 batches. All right, let's take a second and look at that as a picture. So I like to think about our 1.5, right? So let's break that up. We've got 1 1/2. Kind of shade that in so we can see it, right? I've got 1 whole cup of sugar, and then I've got 1/2 a cup of sugar. Okay, and I am breaking this up into 1/4 of a cup each for each batch, right? So 1/4, get this out of the way, means I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 batches that I can make out of that first cup, right? If there's 1/4 of a cup each. And if I break up the second one, there's my 5 and my 6. So that 1.5 cups of sugar turns into 6 batches. So you've got the math part of it and you've got the picture that goes along. All right, third problem we have here, we have Miss Starman walks 5 miles. Mrs. Strong walks half that distance. Miss Taylor walked 4.5 miles. What is the total distance that they walked? So key word here is going to be total. Oops, wrong one. Total, if you remember, tells us to add. And so what are those 3 numbers we're going to be adding up? Well, some clues down. We've got 5. We have this word half. And we have 4.5. So let's list out each of these teachers and how much they're walking. So we've got Starman walked 5 miles, right? Then we know Strong walks half that distance. So remember, if you look up at the top, half tells us to divide by 2. So we're going to take that 5 divided by 2 gives us 2.5 for Miss Strong. And then we have Miss Taylor. She is going to be walking 4.5. And we said total means we're going to add those all together. So when I add them all up, 5 plus 2.5 plus 4.5. I get 12. All right, and on to our last problem for this one, number 4. So a whale is swimming 42 feet below the surface of the ocean. The whale ascends 12.5 feet, then descends 8 feet. What is the whale's new depth? So we know that below can tell us to subtract, or it can also tell us that we have a negative number. We know that ascend was in that addition group, and we know descend was in that subtraction group. So let's talk about the numbers we are working with. We've got 42, 12.5, and 8. And we are trying to find that new depth. So we're going to start with that 42 feet below the surface of the ocean means negative 42 is where we're starting. We're ascending, so adding that 12.5. And then we're descending, subtracting 8. Let's go plug that in the calculator. So we get negative 37.5. And so most of the times when you see this in a word problem, like on a test or a quiz or something, they're not going to give you the answer as negative 37.5. Instead, they're going to say 37.5 feet below the surface. All right, let's go ahead and add in that picture again. So we've got our beautiful water. We got our big whale. And this whale is 42 feet below the surface, right? So we're starting out down here, 42 feet below. We know the whale goes up 12.5, which wouldn't bring him above the water, right? He's still below the water, just higher up. And then descending again, another 8. So we know that we should still be under the water, which makes sense, right? A whale's not going to be jumping out of the water and staying there and floating, right? So we've got this. We started below the surface. We went up a little bit, down a little bit. We wound up 37.5 feet below the surface of the water. Okay, the next few problems are going to be some multi-step problems that might get a little bit more challenging. Okay, so we've got 3 more problems to look at that are going to be a little bit more multi-step problem versus those first ones. So we've got Aaliyah owes her mom $18. She babysits. She earns $40. Then she goes to the movies, spends $5 on a ticket, $6.50 on candy. How much money does she have left? So again, we're starting off with this owes. If you owe someone money, that is like negative money, right? So we know that 18 is going to start out being negative. But then she goes and earns some money, right? So if you're earning money, that's adding to your total. Then if we're going to the movies and we're spending money, again, if you're spending money, that's going to be subtracted. So let's look at the numbers we've got. We've got $18, we've got a $40, $5, and $6.50. So let's go ahead and start from step 1 and kind of go from there. So again, if you owe someone money, we're going to think of that as negative, so negative 18. But then you earned $40 plus 40. We're spending $5 on that movie ticket and spending another $6.50 on another movie ticket. So we can pause here and plug that all in. So once I plug that into the calculator, I get 10.5. Now remember, we're talking about money, so we want to make sure that our answer looks like money. So if we're talking about how much money does she have left, we want $10.5, and we're going to add that extra 0 because money always has 2 decimal places. So she has $10.50 left over. All right, number 6, there are 15 dogs at the doggy daycare. 1/3 of those dogs have brown fur. 2 of those dogs are female. So we want to know how many dogs have brown fur and are male. Okay, so let's start with some key things. We know that of tells us to multiply, especially if it's with a fraction, right? We've got 1/3 of that. So we know we're going to take whatever that total is and multiply it by 1/3. We know that 2 of the dogs are females, so we'll kind of get into that a little later if we're adding, subtracting, what we're doing with that. And so I think the best thing here is a picture. So when we're in doubt, we're going to have a picture to start. So we've got 15 dogs to start. Now, we know that 1/3 of those dogs have brown fur. So one-third of 15 means I am multiplying 1/3 times 15, which is going to give me 5. So I know that 5 dogs have brown fur. Now, we want to know how many of the dogs have brown fur and are male. Okay, So we know from these 5 dogs that have brown fur, 2 of them are female. So I'm going to break this down further. Female, there's 2, which means male. If there's 2 that are female and 5 overall, that means that there has to be 3 male dogs that have that brown fur. So 3 dogs have brown fur and are male. There we go. All right, last one for today. We have Noah is starting a lawn care business this summer. His prices are listed below. So he does mowing for $20, weeding for $5, and leaf removal $10 per hour. This weekend, he mowed 3 lawns, weeded 1 lawn, spent 2 hours removing leaves. How much money does he make? So let's break it down by each one. So we know that he mowed 3 lawns, and mowing gets him $20 per lawn. So we've got $20 times 3 lawns gives us $60, and that's for mowing. Then we know that he weeded 1 lawn, so we've got the $5 per lawn times 1 gives us 5. That's for weeding. And then we've got leaf removal. He spent 2 hours removing leaves, gets $10 per hour, so that's $10 times 2 hours gives us 20, and that is for leaves. Now, if we want to know how much total money he made, right, we're going to add all of those up. So 60 plus 5 gives us 65, plus 20 gives us $85 total that Noah earned. All right, so we have talked about a lot of different word problems today. We've seen a lot of different strategies, including drawing pictures, diagrams, making sure that our things are being labeled correctly. So hopefully we're seeing that word problems don't have to be so scary and overwhelming, and hopefully learn some good strategies. I will see you guys next time. Have a great day.